The debt was paid in fire, Deathworlders unleashed. The galaxy had known peace for 3,000 years. The Galactic Council, made up of 12 ancient species, had built their civilization on cooperation, trade, and the careful avoidance of conflict. They had mapped millions of star systems, cataloged billions of life forms, and established laws that governed everything from resource sharing to first contact protocols. They believed they understood the universe and their place in it. They were wrong. The Velari were the oldest members of the Council. Their delicate, crystalline bodies shimmered with internal light, and they communicated through harmonic frequencies that most species found beautiful. They had achieved space travel when humanity's ancestors were still learning to use fire. The Velari prided themselves on their wisdom, their patience, and their ability to see patterns in chaos. They had guided the younger races for millennia, always with a gentle hand. Ambassador Serafel stood before the massive viewport of the Council station, watching the stars spin slowly past. Her crystalline form caught the light and scattered it into rainbows across the polished floor. She was 300 years old, young by Velari standards, but she had already served on the Council for 50 years. She thought she had seen everything. The report in her hands told her otherwise. A new species had been discovered on the outer rim of explored space. This was not unusual. New species were discovered every few decades. What was unusual was the planet they came from, Earth, a world with crushing gravity, violent weather, extreme temperatures, and an atmosphere filled with a corrosive gas called oxygen, a world where the dominant life forms had evolved by killing and eating each other. A death world. Serafel's harmonics shifted to a worried frequency. Death worlds were rare. The species that evolved on them were usually too aggressive, too dangerous to be allowed into civilized space. The last death world species, the Krethak, had nearly destroyed the Council before they were contained on their home world 2,000 years ago. But these humans were different, the report said. They had developed technology without help. They had reached their own moon using primitive chemical rockets. They were on the verge of discovering faster than light travel on their own. And most troubling of all, they had somehow detected Council survey ships and were actively trying to make contact. The Council had a choice to make. They could ignore the humans and hope they never developed FTL technology. They could destroy them before they became a threat. Or they could make contact and hope that these Deathworlders could be civilized. Serafel voted for contact. It was a decision that would change everything. The first human ambassador arrived at the Council station 6 months later. His name was Marcus Chen, and he was nothing like what the Council expected. He was small by human standards, barely over 1.7 meters tall, with black hair turning gray at the temples and eyes that seemed to notice everything. He did not look like a monster. He looked like someone's grandfather, but the Council members who met him could sense something beneath his calm exterior. There was a tension in his muscles, a readiness in his stance that spoke of a lifetime of fighting. The Velari could read emotional frequencies, and what they read from Marcus Chen was controlled violence, barely contained rage, and underneath it all, a desperate hope. Marcus Chen had been a soldier before becoming a diplomat. He had fought in 3 wars on Earth, had killed men with his bare hands, had watched friends die in his arms. He had seen the worst that humanity could do to itself. And yet here he was, representing his entire species, hoping that somewhere out there things could be different. The Council gave humanity probationary membership. They would be observed, evaluated, and judged. If they proved themselves capable of civilization, they would be granted full membership. If not, well, the Council had ways of dealing with dangerous species. For 50 years, humanity proved itself. They followed Council laws. They traded fairly. They contributed to scientific research. They even joined the peacekeeping forces, their natural strength and endurance making them valuable soldiers. Slowly, the council began to relax. Perhaps the Deathworlders could be civilized after all, but some members of the council never forgot what humans were. The Sindari, a species of cold-blooded reptilians who controlled most of the galaxy's financial systems, watched humanity's rise with growing concern. Humans were too adaptable, too resilient, too good at everything they tried. In 50 years, they had gone from a primitive species to a major economic power. In another 50 years, they might rival the Sindari themselves. Lord Kethros of the Sindari Trade Consortium did not intend to let that happen. The Sindari had built their empire on debt. They lent money to developing species, helped them build infrastructure and technology, and then collected interest for generations. Half the species in the council owed the Sindari more than they could ever repay. This debt gave the Sindari power, influence, and control. Humanity had refused to play this game. They had built their own infrastructure, developed their own technology, and traded their way to prosperity without borrowing a single credit from the Sindari. This was not just an insult, it was a threat. If other species saw that it was possible to succeed without Sindari loans, the entire system might collapse. Kethros began planning humanity's destruction. It started slowly, subtly. Trade deals fell through at the last moment. Shipping routes were mysteriously disrupted. Human colonies found themselves cut off from vital supplies. The council investigated but found no evidence of wrongdoing. The Sindari were too careful, too experienced at this game. Then came the plague. It appeared on the human colony world of New Hope, a planet with 3 million inhabitants. The disease was unlike anything human doctors had ever seen. It spread through the air, through water, through touch. It killed within days and there was no cure. Within a month, half the population was dead. Within 2 months, the colony was a graveyard. Human scientists analyzed the plague and made a horrifying discovery. It was artificial. Someone had engineered a disease specifically designed to kill humans while leaving other species untouched. Someone had committed genocide. Ambassador Chen, now 90 years old but still sharp as ever, brought his evidence to the council. He stood before the assembled representatives of 12 species and laid out his case. The genetic markers, the artificial proteins, the impossible coincidence of a disease that targeted only one species. He demanded justice. The council deliberated for 3 days. In the end, they delivered their verdict: insufficient evidence. The Sindari had covered their tracks too well. The other council members were too afraid of angering their creditors, too dependent on Sindari money and influence. Some of them even owed the Sindari personal debts that could be called in at any moment. The vote was 9-3 against investigation. Chen stood in the council chamber, his hands shaking with rage. 3 million people were dead. 3 million humans who had trusted the council to protect them, and the council had chosen to look the other way. For a long moment, Chen said nothing. The council members shifted nervously. They could feel something building in the old man, something dark and dangerous. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the vast chamber. "You have made your choice," he said. "Now we will make ours. Humanity is leaving the council. We will not forget this debt, and we will collect what is owed." He turned and walked out of the chamber. The doors closed behind him with a sound like thunder. The Valari ambassador, Seraphel, who had grown old herself in the 50 years since first contact, felt a chill run through her crystalline body. She had read the histories. She knew what happened when Deathworlders went to war. She tried to warn the council, tried to tell them what they had awakened. No one listened. 3 days later, every human in council space vanished. Ships, stations, colonies, all of them emptied overnight. It was as if humanity had never existed. The Council was confused at first, then relieved. Perhaps the Deathworlders had decided to retreat to their homeworld. Perhaps the crisis was over. It was only the beginning. 6 months passed. The Council returned to its normal business. The Sindari celebrated their victory. Lord Kethros received commendations for his handling of the human problem. Life went on as it always had. Then the attacks began. A Sindari trade convoy disappeared without a trace, then another, then a mining station, then a colony. No distress calls. No survivors. No evidence of what had happened. Ships sent to investigate found only empty space where stations had once orbited. The Sindari demanded Council protection. Peacekeeping fleets were dispatched to guard Sindari installations. It made no difference. The attacks continued. Ships vanished from within heavily guarded systems. Stations disappeared while defense fleets watched helplessly. Lord Kethros demanded answers. His intelligence services launched the largest investigation in Sindari history. They found nothing. It was as if the attackers existed outside of space and time, striking from nowhere and vanishing without a trace. Then, exactly 1 year after the plague, a message arrived at Council headquarters. It was broadcast on every frequency, transmitted to every station, displayed on every screen in Council space. The message was simple. 3 million humans died on New Hope. 3 million Sindari have now died. The first debt is paid, but there are more debts to settle. Attached to the message was a list. Every species that had voted against the investigation, every council member who had accepted Sindari bribes, every corporation that had profited from the plague, every individual who had played any role in the genocide. The list contained 10,000 names. The message ended with a single sentence. "We are coming." The council erupted into chaos. Some members demanded immediate military action against Earth. Others called for surrender and negotiation. The Sindari screamed for revenge. The Valari pleaded for calm. Seraphel watched it all with growing horror. She had tried to warn them. She had tried to tell them that humanity was different, that Deathworlders did not think like civilized species. They had evolved on a world where every day was a battle for survival. They did not know how to surrender. They did not know how to forgive. They only knew how to fight and fight and fight until their enemies were destroyed or they were dead. The Council had awakened something ancient and terrible, something that had slept inside humanity for 50,000 years. The instinct that had driven their ancestors to conquer their brutal world, to hunt every predator to extinction, to wage war on each other with unrelenting ferocity. Humanity had learned to control this instinct, to channel it, to hide it behind smiles and diplomacy. But the Council had torn away that mask. They had hurt humanity, betrayed humanity, murdered humanity's children. Now humanity was going to show the galaxy what Deathworlders really were, and the galaxy was not ready. The war that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. For 3,000 years, conflicts in Council space had been limited affairs. Ships would posture, diplomats would negotiate, and eventually someone would pay reparations and everyone would go home. The idea of total war, of fighting until one side was completely destroyed, was considered barbaric, primitive, something only Deathworlders would do. The Council was about to learn why Deathworlders ruled their planets. Admiral Sarah Chen, granddaughter of the first human ambassador, commanded the Earth Defense Fleet from the bridge of the carrier Vengeance. She was 60 years old, with iron-gray hair cropped short and eyes that had seen too much death. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. Her grandfather had told her stories when she was a child, had warned her that peace with the Council would not last. He had made her promise to be ready. She was ready. The human fleet that emerged from the darkness of deep space was nothing like what the Council expected. They had assumed that 50 years of peace had made humanity soft. that the Deathworlders had forgotten how to wage war. They were wrong. Humanity had spent those 50 years preparing for this day. Every trade ship was actually a warship in disguise. Every colony was actually a military base. Every peaceful human citizen was actually a trained soldier waiting for the call. The first battle took place in the Sindari home system. The Sindari fleet outnumbered the humans 5-1. They had the latest council technology, the best weapons, the most advanced shields. They were confident of victory. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the Sindari fleet was debris. Not a single human ship had been destroyed. The Sindari watched in horror as Admiral Chen's fleet took up position around their home world. Chen broadcast a message to the planet below. "You created a plague that killed 3 million humans," she said. "You could have killed us quickly, cleanly. Instead, you made our people suffer. They choked on their own blood. They watched their children die in their arms. You made them beg for death." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was ice. "We could destroy your world from orbit. It would take less than an hour. But that would be too quick, too clean. You do not deserve mercy. You deserve to understand what you did. Human dropships descended on the Sindari home world, not to bomb it, not to burn it, but to deliver something far worse. Medical teams, scientists, engineers. They came not to destroy, but to help. They brought with them a cure for the plague they had developed years ago. They shared it freely with every species in council space. They rebuilt the infrastructure the war had damaged. They treated the wounded, fed the hungry, sheltered the homeless. They showed the galaxy what humanity could have been, what humanity had wanted to be before the Council's betrayal. And they left the Sindari untouched. For 6 months, the Sindari waited for the hammer to fall. They fortified their cities, armed their citizens, prepared for the invasion that never came. Human ships patrolled their system, but never attacked. Human soldiers walked their streets, but never raised their weapons. The waiting was worse than any battle. Then, one morning, the Sindari woke up to find that their entire financial system had collapsed. Every credit they owned was worthless. Every debt they held had been erased. Every contract they had signed had been voided. Humanity had not attacked their bodies. They had attacked their power. The Sindari had built their empire on debt. Without it, they were nothing. In a single night, they had gone from the richest species in the galaxy to the poorest. Their vassals, freed from their obligations, turned on them. Species they had oppressed for generations demanded reparations. Allies they had bought with money abandoned them. The Sindari fell, not to human weapons, but to human cunning. Lord Kethros, the architect of the plague, was found in his palace 3 days later. He had taken his own life rather than face the humiliation of poverty. Beside his body was a note that simply said, "They were not supposed to be this clever." The council watched all of this with growing terror. They had expected human brutality. They had prepared for human violence. They had not prepared for this cold, calculating patience. Humanity was not fighting a war. They were conducting an execution. One by one, the species who had voted against the investigation found themselves targeted, not with weapons, but with information. Every secret deal, every hidden crime, every buried scandal was exposed to the galaxy. Governments fell. Leaders were imprisoned. Species that had oppressed their own people for millennia found themselves facing revolution. Humanity did not need to fire a shot. They simply told the truth. Ambassador Serafel requested a meeting with Admiral Chen. She was the only council member who had voted in favor of the investigation, the only one who had argued for justice. She hoped that might count for something. They met on a neutral station, just the two of them, surrounded by empty space. Chen looked older than her years, worn down by the weight of command, but her eyes were still sharp, still dangerous. "Why are you doing this?" Serafel asked. "You could have simply destroyed them. It would have been quicker." Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was tired. "Do you know what the hardest thing about being human is?" she asked. "It is living with what we are capable of. We carry violence inside us like a second heart. It beats constantly, demanding blood. Every moment of every day, we have to choose not to give in to it." She looked out at the stars. "When the plague hit New Hope, I wanted to burn the galaxy. I wanted to make every species feel what we felt. I wanted to watch them suffer and die, and know that they had brought it on themselves. That is what the monster inside me wanted." She turned back to Seraphel. "But we are not monsters. We refuse to be. So instead of destruction, we chose justice. Not revenge, justice. We are holding a mirror up to the galaxy and showing them what they really are. Every species that participated in this crime will face the consequences of their actions, not because we want them to suffer, but because they need to understand what they did. Only then can things change." Seraphel's harmonics shifted to a confused frequency. "You want to change the galaxy?" Chen nodded. "The council system is broken. It rewards cruelty and punishes kindness. It allows the strong to prey on the weak and calls it civilization. We cannot live in a galaxy like that, so we are going to fix it." "You cannot force change," Seraphel said. "You cannot make people better at gunpoint." Chen smiled, and for the first time, she looked almost human. "We are not forcing anything. We are just creating opportunities. Every species we have targeted had enemies, had victims, had people who wanted things to be different but were too afraid to act. We are giving those people a chance. What they do with it is up to them." She stood up. "The old galaxy is dying. A new one is being born. You can be part of that new galaxy, or you can cling to the old one and fall with it. The choice is yours." She walked out of the room, leaving Seraphel alone with her thoughts. The war continued for another 2 years. It was not really a war, not in any traditional sense. There were battles, yes, but they were always defensive. Human forces never attacked unprovoked. They simply waited for the council to strike, then destroyed whatever forces were sent against them with brutal efficiency. The council tried everything. They sent assassins after human leaders. The assassins disappeared. They tried to infiltrate human systems with spies. The spies were captured and returned unharmed, with detailed reports of everything the council was planning. They tried to develop new weapons, new technologies, anything that might give them an edge. Human scientists released the same technologies publicly, for free, before the council could even finish testing them. It was demoralizing. It was humiliating. And slowly, inevitably, it was working. Species began to defect. First, the ones who had been oppressed by the council for generations. Then the ones who simply could not see a path to victory. Then even some of the core members, the ones who had been loyal for millennia. They looked at humanity, at what humanity could do, at what humanity offered, and they made a choice. The Valari were among the last to decide. Seraphel argued for alliance with humanity. She had seen the alternative. She had watched species fight and die for a system that had never served them. She did not want her people to be next. The debate lasted 3 days. In the end, the Valari voted to seek peace with humanity. Not because they were afraid, though they were. Not because they were weak, though they felt weak. But because Seraphel convinced them that humanity was offering something the council never had, a chance to be better. The peace treaty was signed on the anniversary of the New Hope plague. Admiral Chen represented humanity. Seraphel represented the Valari and the 6 other species that had chosen to defect. The remaining council members refused to attend. The treaty was simple. Humanity would not seek vengeance against those who surrendered. The old debts would be forgiven. The old crimes would be recorded but not punished. In exchange, the signatory species agreed to a new code of conduct. No species would be allowed to oppress another. No species would be allowed to commit genocide. No species would be allowed to use debt as a weapon. It was not perfect. It was not even close to perfect. But it was a beginning. Admiral Chen signed her name at the bottom of the treaty. Her hand was steady, but her eyes were wet. 3 million people died on New Hope, she said. Nothing we do will bring them back. Nothing we do will undo their suffering. But maybe, just maybe, we can make sure it never happens again. She looked at Seraphel. That is the debt we owe them. That is the debt we will spend the rest of our lives trying to pay. Seraphel reached out and touched Chen's hand. The contact was strange, alien, but somehow comforting. Then we will pay it together, she said. The remaining council members watched from the shadows, unwilling to surrender but unable to fight. They knew that their time was running out. Humanity had broken the old order. Something new was rising to take its place, and humanity was not finished yet. 10 years had passed since the peace treaty. The galaxy was a different place now. The old council was gone, replaced by a new assembly that included humanity and the species that had joined them. The Sindari Empire had crumbled into a dozen squabbling factions, none of them powerful enough to threaten anyone. The species that had participated in the genocide had faced justice, not through violence, but through truth. Their governments had fallen, their leaders had been imprisoned. Their people had begun the long, painful process of acknowledging what had been done in their name. It was not peace, not really. Old hatreds still simmered beneath the surface. Some species would never forgive humanity for humiliating them. Others would never trust the Deathworlders, no matter how many times they proved themselves. The galaxy was scarred, wounded, still bleeding in places that might never heal. But it was better than it had been. And that was something. Admiral Sarah Chen had retired from the military 3 years after the treaty. She had spent her entire adult life preparing for war, fighting war, winning war. She did not know how to live in peace, so she had stepped down, handed command to younger officers, and disappeared to a small colony on the edge of human space. She was 80 years old now. Her hair was white, her face lined with wrinkles, her body worn out by decades of stress and struggle. But her mind was still sharp, and her eyes still held that dangerous light that had terrified the council. She spent her days tending a garden. It was a small thing, just a few square meters of earth and plants behind her modest house. She grew tomatoes, peppers, beans, the same vegetables her grandfather had grown when she was a child. The work was simple, honest, satisfying in a way that war had never been. Sometimes visitors came, old soldiers who wanted to pay their respects, young officers who wanted advice, diplomats and politicians who wanted her endorsement for one cause or another. She turned most of them away. She had given enough of herself to the galaxy. What remained she wanted to keep, but one visitor she could not turn away. Seraphel arrived on a morning in late spring when the garden was just beginning to bloom. She was ancient now. Even by Valari standards, her crystalline body clouded with age. But she still moved with grace, and her harmonics still carried the wisdom of centuries. Chen met her at the door. "You look old," Chen said. Seraphel's harmonics shifted to something like amusement. "You look older." Chen smiled and led her inside. They sat in Chen's small living room surrounded by books and memories. Chen made tea, a habit she had never been able to break, and they drank in comfortable silence. Finally, Seraphel spoke. "I came to thank you." Chen raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For being right," Seraphel said. "When you told me that you wanted to change the galaxy, I did not believe you. I thought it was just rhetoric, just words to justify your vengeance. I was wrong." She looked out the window at the garden. "The galaxy is better than it was. Not perfect, not even good, but better. Species that were oppressed are now free. Systems that were corrupt are now fair. Crimes that were hidden are now known. None of that would have happened without you." Chen was quiet for a long moment. "It was not me," she said finally. "It was all of us. Every human who fought, every human who died, every human who refused to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. I was just the one who gave the orders." "But you chose those orders," Seraphel said. "You could have chosen vengeance. You could have burned the galaxy and called it justice. Many would have followed you, but you chose a harder path." Chen set down her tea. "Do you know why I really did it?" she asked. "Why I held back, why I chose patience over destruction?" Seraphel waited. "It was because of my grandfather. He told me a story once about the early days of contact with the Council. He said that when he first arrived at Council headquarters, he was terrified. Not of the aliens, not of the technology, but of himself. He was afraid that if the galaxy rejected humanity, he would not be able to control his anger. He was afraid he would become the monster the Council expected him to be." She smiled at the memory. But then something happened. A Valari ambassador approached him, not with fear or suspicion, but with curiosity. She asked him about Earth, about human history, about what it was like to live on a death world. She listened to his answers. She treated him like a person, not like a threat. Her eyes met Seraphel's. "That ambassador was you." Seraphel's harmonics shifted to surprise. "I remember that conversation. It was so long ago, I did not think it mattered." "It mattered," Chen said. "It mattered more than you know. My grandfather told me about it every year on my birthday. He said it was the moment he realized that maybe, just maybe, humans and aliens could understand each other. That maybe we did not have to be enemies." She stood up and walked to the window. "When the plague hit, when the Council betrayed us, I wanted to destroy everything. The monster inside me was screaming for blood. But then I remembered that story. I remembered that one Valari who had chosen kindness when she did not have to. And I thought, if there is one like her, there might be more. If we destroy the galaxy, we destroy them too." She turned back to Seraphel. "So I held back. Not because I forgave the Council, not because I wanted peace, but because I did not want to become the thing they feared. I did not want to prove them right about Deathworlders. I wanted to show them that we could be better." Seraphel rose and crossed the room. She reached out and took Chen's hand, just as she had done at the treaty signing all those years ago. "You succeeded," she said. "You showed the galaxy that Deathworlders are not monsters. You showed them that the species they feared most was also capable of mercy, of patience, of wisdom. That is a greater victory than any battle." Chen shook her head. "The work is not finished. It will never be finished. As long as there are beings capable of cruelty, there will be cruelty. As long as there is power, there will be those who abuse it. We pushed back the darkness for a moment, but it will return. It always does. Then we will push it back again," Seraphel said, "and again, for as long as necessary. That is what it means to be civilized. Not the absence of darkness, but the willingness to fight it." Chen smiled. "You know, for a crystalline alien, you sound almost human." Seraphel's harmonics shifted to warmth. "I will take that as a compliment." They stood together in the quiet room, two old warriors who had seen too much and done too much, finding peace at last in each other's company. Outside, the garden bloomed. Life continued. The galaxy turned. Far away on Earth, a new generation was growing up. Children who had never known the old Council never felt the fear and suspicion that had once divided humans and aliens. To them, the war was just history, a story their grandparents told. They saw aliens as friends, as neighbors, as family. They could not imagine a time when things had been different. And on New Hope, rebuilt now, repopulated, thriving, a memorial stood at the center of the capital city. 3 million names carved into black stone, a record of everyone who had died in the plague. People came from all over the galaxy to visit, to read the names, to remember. Many species made the pilgrimage. Sindari, filled with shame. Velari, filled with sorrow. Humans, filled with grief that never quite faded. At the base of the memorial, a plaque bore a simple inscription. They died, because we were strangers. May we never be strangers again. It was not enough. It would never be enough. 3 million lives could not be balanced by any memorial, any treaty, any amount of time. The debt would never truly be paid. But every day, beings from 100 worlds came together to try. Every day they chose cooperation over conflict, understanding over fear, hope over hatred. Every day, they proved that the death of 3 million could mean something, could change something, could make the galaxy a little bit better than it was. That was the real debt humanity had demanded. Not blood for blood, not fire for fire, but change. Real, lasting change. The kind of change that takes generations to build and only moments to destroy. The kind of change that requires constant vigilance, constant effort, constant sacrifice. Humanity had paid part of that debt with fire. They had burned away the corrupt systems, the unjust laws, the cruel hierarchies that had allowed genocide to happen. But fire alone could not build anything. It could only destroy. The rest of the debt would be paid with patience, with teaching and learning, with reaching out across the void between species and finding common ground, with choosing every single day to be better than the day before. It would take centuries. It might never be complete. The darkness would push back. There would be setbacks, failures, moments when it seemed like everything was falling apart. But humanity had learned something in their long journey from Deathworld to stars. They had learned that the only battles worth fighting were the ones that never ended. The battle against cruelty, against injustice, against the easy path of hate. Those battles could never be won, not finally, not forever. But they could be fought. They could be fought with every breath, every choice, every moment of compassion in a universe that did not require compassion. Admiral Chen died 6 months after Seraphel's visit. She passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family, her last thoughts of a garden and a galaxy and a debt that had finally been paid. Seraphel spoke at her funeral. She told the story of a young Velari ambassador who had once asked a strange alien about his world, and how that simple act of curiosity had changed everything. She told the story of a species that had come from darkness and chosen light. She told the story of humanity. When she finished, she looked out at the assembled crowd, humans and aliens standing together, unified in grief and hope. The debt was paid in fire, she said, but the interest is paid in kindness. Sarah Chen taught us that. Let us never forget. The crowd dispersed. The galaxy continued to turn. And somewhere, on 1,000 worlds, children looked up at the stars and dreamed of a future where no one had to be afraid. That future was coming. Slowly, painfully, imperfectly, but coming. And that was worth everything they had sacrificed. That was worth everything they had endured. That was the true legacy of the Deathworlders who had dared to dream of something better. The debt was paid. The fire had cooled. And from the ashes, something new and beautiful was beginning to grow.